I want to welcome you all back from the break. And if you're just joining us, you're welcome to the annual meeting of the Innovation Lab for Crop Improvement. We had such a great facilitated discussion by Steve, and I wish we would continue, but in interest of time, we have to move forward. And now, we have a next panel that is about the journey to self-reliance and the path for crop improvement at NARIs. On this panel, we have representation from the NARI leadership. We have our NARI partners, and we have our sponsors as well. So I'm gonna introduce them, and as I introduce you, please unmute yourself and turn on your video. Thank you. First of all, I'll go with Dr. Yona Baguma. He is the Deputy Director General at the National Agricultural Research Organization, NARO. He's a molecular biologist by training and has served as a researcher and leader in agricultural research for over 30 years. During his service, Dr. Yona Baguma has developed skills in financial management, human resources management, public relations, social integration, science communication, government liaison, partnership building, project development and implementation. He currently serves on a number of national, regional, and global boards. And he has a long-standing interest in the broader agricultural sector. Our next panelist is Dr. Scovia Adikini. She is a plant breeder and a team leader for dry land cereal program, research program at NaSARRI, the National Semi-Arid Resources Research Institute, one of the institutes under National Agriculture Research Organization in Uganda. Our research focuses on improving the finger millet and sorghum productivity for food and nutritional security and income through breeding for varieties that are well adapted to biotic and abiotic stress. She is also currently the PI for the Innovation Lab for Crop Improvement in East Africa, where she leads the team to operationalize the East African Center of Innovation for Finger Millet and Sorghum. Next is Dr. Bish Das. He works for the Cgir Excellence in Breeding Platform as a NARO's coordinator, coordinating engagement between the EIB platform and national programs. He's a plant breeder by training, and prior he worked for Syngenta as the African breeding lead and for CIMMYT as a maize breeder in Mexico and Kenya. Our next panelist is Dr. Jessica Kampanje Firi. She is a lecturer of social work and deputy head for the Department of Human Ecology at the Lilongwe University of Agriculture and Natural Resources, also known as LUANAR. She is a co-PI on the Innovation Lab for Crop Improvement Center of Innovation for Crop Improvement for East and Southern Africa in Malawi. And last and not the least is Dr. Angela Records. She is a science advisor in the Bureau for Resilience and Food Security in USAID, where she manages crop improvement, plant disease, and post-harvest handling research programs. In addition to her program management duties, she is a deputy lead for the RFS Research Community of Practice, and she leads an innovation team for the Bureau Center for Agriculture-Led Growth. Please, I would ask you all to turn on your videos and as we start this panel. So this panel was set up because of the vision of the ILCI, and the vision of ILCI is to serve as a support system, as we have heard in the welcome address, to support starts as a support system for the National Agricultural Research Institution in target regions to identify, develop, pilot, and transfer appropriate tools, technologies, and methods and delivering genetic gain, increased genetic gain and new varieties for key product profiles in this region. So here we want to garner multiple viewpoints to frame what NARIs need to be, what NARIs need to be self-reliant, and where the gaps are and what we can do differently. So I'll go ahead and pose this question to all the 5 of you. And that question is, what do NARIs need to become self-reliant in crop improvement research? I would go in the order, because this is to all of you, I'll go in the order with which I introduced you all. So Dr. Baguma.
Yeah, thanks so much for that question. I see 3 cardinal areas. Area number 1 is to strengthen the human component. In most of the NARIs, we focus on multiple objectives, we focus on multiple commodities, we focus on multiple problems. And we have limited number of human component. And still the human component are limited in terms of their skills with regard to recent tools to do with the crop improvement plant breeding. So the first area of focus must be to improve the human component. The second area of focus is investing in infrastructure. And we see 3 cardinal infrastructure. The laboratories that meet the requirements for the products that are in question for development, the screen houses, and above all, capacity to conserve genetic resources. In the case of, for example, most African states, and in the case of NARO, we continue to lose a number of genetic resources because we have limited capacity to meaningfully conserve our genetic resources. And the plant breeding program cannot be without genetic resources. It is therefore important that we should invest in building capacity for conservation of genetic resources. And lastly, I think it is important for us to invest in modern breeding tools, technologies and methods to speed up the process of making advances in crop improvement. So to me, if I was to rank the top 3, I would go for the human component, infrastructure, and investment in modern breeding tools. I submit.
Thank you, Dr. Baguma, for that beautiful suggestions and ideas. I'll go to Scovia.
Yeah, thank you so much. Dr. Baguma has actually mentioned most of the key things that we need to be self-reliant. But I will add that in addition to what he mentioned, we also need a research that is market focused so that whatever we do reaches the end user, and that will make our program self-reliance. And in terms of capacity building, as he mentioned, I will highlight that we need both graduate training, but we also need training like internship and exchange visit for technical staff to learn from those who are already well established so that they can bring back the knowledge and also implement in their system. And in terms of infrastructure, as Dr. Yona has mentioned, I will add that for the breeding program, we need to mechanize the breeding processes. Currently, most of the breeding activities that we do are manually done, and that delays actually the decisions that we make in our breeding. You find that one season, we can do trial only for one season, and because everything is manually done, the data analysis process, the data collection, the planting, we end up wasting a whole year just establishing one season experiment. So I feel in addition to what Dr. Baguma submitted, we need to mechanize the whole system. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scovia. I'll go to Bish to answer, to give us his thought on that question about what NARIs need to become self-reliant in crop improvement research.
Okay, thanks very much for the question, Sarah. So yeah, it's a very pertinent question and a difficult question. So I think just to start off with some positives. So one of the very positive things we see now as we visit a lot of national programs is the influx of a lot of very young, very well qualified researchers. And the strength of any institute, whether it's a national program or a CG center or any institute, really depends on the strength of its people. And this is something that's really encouraging that we are seeing over the last few years, largely as a result of investment that other organizations like AGRA, USAID, the Gates Foundation have made in setting up, regional hubs of training and so on. So this is really a very positive development and something that national programs can build on as they try and become self-reliant. In terms of technical capacity, national programs need access to modern tools, services, and technology. So this is absolutely critical for national programs to be running effective breeding programs. The question is how to provide access to these modern tools and services. And our thinking is probably strengthening the networks and collaboration amongst national programs within a region is the best way to go, because each individual national program to develop capacity and invest in infrastructure in many of these things would be unsustainable and might not justify it based on the market size. So developing stronger regional networks with centralized services that are available for all national partners in the region would be one of our recommendations. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Bish. Jessica, what are your thoughts on this question? You're muted.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. And as probably one coming when two previous speakers have spoken, I wouldn't make the other points redundant. So I'll just add a few points to what have already been added by my colleagues. I think one aspect which probably also Dr. Scovia mentioned was emphasizing on market responsive plant breeding. I would add on that kind of research needs to be context specific and gender and youth inclusive. For instance, in a country like Malawi, where about 50% of the population are women and 46% are youth, and to do anything that is impactful, we really need to consider whatever research we are doing to be inclusive in every way possible. So I think to be impactful, we really need, we can't do without being inclusive, both in terms of gender and youth. I think my addition to this discussion would submit that contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Angela.
Oh, my colleagues on this panel are better suited to address this question because they're on the ground and they know the real needs. I would just add, in addition to the comments that were made, that no institution is completely self-reliant. And I think that David may have touched on this a bit yesterday when he was talking about Corteva. And this is also maybe what Bish was just talking about, networking, but that partnerships are absolutely critical when it comes to crop improvement and product development. And so my short answer, in addition to what was said before, is that what we need is partnerships, what NARIs need, and partnerships that are backstopped by the best science. And I think that's what we're trying to achieve through the Crop Improvement Innovation Lab. This is exemplified by the Centers of Excellence. So these are multi-institutional regional partnerships that are backstopped by cutting-edge science. And this was all designed with self-reliance as a central tenet. So in addition to the important submissions by my colleagues, I would just add that.
Thank you very much, Angela, and thank you all for your views on this question. I'll go to the question that talks about, as you support this question, I'm going to direct to Scovia, Yona, and Jessica. And I'm thinking we talk about the gaps you may see as you look at the landscape of crop improvement projects and programs you're involved in. What gaps, in addition to all what you have said, what other loopholes do you see, and what do you think we need more investment in? We know about human capacity development and infrastructure. And outside of that, what else are there out there that we need to capture? This question will be for Yona, Scovia, and Jessica.
I would like to make an initial submission. When you look at the progress we've made in improving the performance of most of the crop varieties, that progress is not reflected at farm level. And the greatest limiting factor is seed system. Most farmers in our countries are using seed that is not of the improved varieties, more especially when it comes to the root crops, tubers, and banana. There is an exception when you compare with crops like maize. For maize, we seem to have some improved seed systems. So the limitations surrounding seed system should squarely be addressed if we are to make sure that the progress we are making at research level impacts on society. So the focus then should be on improving seed systems. And in that, we may need, for example, to build capacity in irrigation. We may need to build capacity in tissue culture-based systems. And we may also need to build capacity in semi-autotrophic hydroponics to be able to address some of the limitations in those critical crop commodities, which are a pillar for food security and economic security. The other issue I'd like to bring on table is the glaring gap between the productivity gains that we are able to register at on station vis-a-vis the on-farm yields. What I think for so many years we've been calling the yield penalty. Ever since I was in school in the 1980s, we were taught about yield penalty. It is now almost 30 years, we still continue talking about yield penalty. Why has yield penalty surrounded us for so many years? It is simply because we are failing to connect what we are able to achieve at the institute levels with what is actually the practice at farm level. And the greatest bottleneck are the production methods. We have tended to forget about the agronomy, the production methods at farm level. And because of that, there is a lot of yield compromise. The farmers cannot realize the genetic potential of the varieties. I think we need to improve on the production systems that our farmers are employing to produce the crops that we desire them to produce. So I would basically, to me, front those two factors, the seed system and the agronomy, the production methods at farm level.
Thank you so much for those thoughts. Scovia, do you have any thoughts on the gaps that you see?
Yes, thank you very much. I think Dr. Yona has also hinted on what I wanted, but I want to add that there's also limited visibility, especially in terms of the research. We do research, but at the end, where there's need for uptake, the visibility is limited, and that needs to be addressed, especially in terms of awareness creation, because sometimes most of the farmers are not even aware of the existing technology. There's a need for investing in awareness creation to make people know the kind of technology we have, but we also need serious investment, especially on germplasm conservation facilities and irrigation facility. And generally to continue echo my first point on the mechanization of the breeding processes. If we can address those, surely it will improve the breeding program in the institutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Scovia. Thank you for those thought-provoking comments. Jessica?
Yes, thank you, Sarah. I think in addition to what my colleagues have already contributed, I would like to also add on that we could strengthen the link between extension services and plant breeders, and also trying to understand the context in which our breeding processes are taking place. Specifically, I would take in our case where we're going to do in terms of, we are going to focus on cowpea value chain. We find out that in most cases, maybe plant breeders will work by just isolating important traits that they might think might be valuable for crop resilient and maybe high yielding varieties, ignoring the fact that the end users might have specific or value systems that might be contributing to a selection of specific varieties. So we need to make a deliberate effort to invest a lot in understanding a specific value chain before probably we start maybe producing more of a specific breeding line. So I think that one is also an investment we should make a deliberate effort on. And also there's a need to put a policy environment or policy mechanisms that recognizes or put a conducive environment for plant breeders to be able to engage in their activities very smoothly, so that basically there is the thing that we already mentioned in terms of collaboration. There is smooth collaboration between farmers, global practitioners, as well as the academia, as well as those who are in agro dealership. And this should be stipulated clearly in policies that are clear and well strengthened by national governments. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica, for that comment. I'm wondering, the policies you're talking about, this is a tangent, you're talking about these policies are made by the government? Or can you enlighten us on those policies you referred to?
Yeah, I'm talking probably more in the context of Malawi. Currently, we don't have probably, we have a draft policy on farmer breeders policy, which is not active at the moment. So like breeding activities might not be guided by national stipulated policies that everybody maybe can easily tap into or understand how each and every player in breeding processes can engage or network. So I was talking in terms of those kind of policies, like at national level. In our case, that is limited, but maybe in other regions that is clear. But in our case, that would be something that would, if it's invested on, would really add something to the process that we are talking about. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We'll move to this next question, and it's directed towards Bisha and Angela. As you support regional and global research agendas, how are you structuring feedback loops, to ensure local needs and goals for crop improvement are reflected in your policies? Bish?
Sure, thank you, Sarah. So I'll try and answer that question from the perspective of excellence in breeding. So we are a CGIAR platform. We're part of the CGIAR system. And one of the things that we're looking at is strengthening the networks between the CGIAR and the affiliated national programs. So strengthening CGIAR and national breeding networks. And you know, within those networks, the breeding process is pretty long. If we start with pre-breeding and get to population improvement and the meat of the breeding program, and then evaluation and into seed systems, it's a very long chain. And one of the areas we're trying to focus on is clearly defining the roles that national programs will play in this chain and the roles that CGIR programs will play in this chain. And one area where we see national programs really taking leadership is gathering market information and identifying country-specific priorities, formalizing that information in documented product profiles, and then in a systematic and regular way, feeding that information back to the breeding programs in the CGIR and also to national programs that do have active breeding programs. So really, we see the feedback for the national programs coming through that mechanism, through the development of formalized product profiles, through their participation in annual project meetings, in annual advancement meetings, where national partners are able to share information with CGIR centers and help set direction for the breeding programs that the large CGIR programs are running. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Bish, for giving us that perspective from the EIB. Angela, your thoughts on this question?
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, I mean, I have some similar, my response is similar to Bish. The past 2 or 3 years have been a time of reflection for us at the Bureau for Resilience and Food Security in regards to our strategy for supporting crop improvement. And this was not unique to USAID. Our colleagues across the donor community who invest in the CGIAR and other activities have been having parallel conversations. And we took a high-level look at the breeding pipeline, where we're investing in it and where there are gaps in support or other needs. And it was this reflection that actually was the genesis of the Crop Improvement Innovation Lab. As you heard yesterday, ILCI partners are breeding toward product profiles, which is what Bish just mentioned as well. So local needs and goals are considered from the beginning. And this reflection and analysis continues for us at USAID. So we've recently developed a product lifecycle assessment tool, which we're applying to our activities, systematically looking to identify opportunities to connect our partners and create synergies, with the goal of ensuring that products, in this case, improved varieties, make it to the end users and then actually meet their needs. And we'll be holding our programs to this standard. So that's really kind of the feedback that we're building in now to our policies. And I think it's consistent with what the EIB and others are doing.
Thank you, that's fantastic. I'm excited to hear that. Thank you. Next, I'll present this question to all of us. And at this point, I would like us to chime in, so, and the question is that, I know that ILCI, this is just the first year of ILCI, but what specifically could ILCI do differently to support NARI's journey to crop improvement self-reliance? What specifically? Anybody?
Maybe I look at 3 things. There is the aspect of promoting cross-learning and experiential learning. That is between the breeding programs within a national research system and between the national research systems across the region and across the globe. And this will help to facilitate adoption of proven tools, technologies, and methods. Because in my view, this is basically what really surrounds most of the breeding programs around us. And that, of course, then would require for very carefully thought through strategic partnerships and collaborations that will foster innovations, that will reduce a lot of research redundancy within the breeding programs, and also to an extent will reduce wastage in research operations and then be able to deliver impact where it is most needed. So that intervention alone will save a lot of resources, will save a lot of time, and will be able to leverage on capacity limitations across the NARIs. Number two, I see an area of working towards quick but very small successes. Remember that we focus on a number of multiple goals and objectives. So taking one at a time and aiming at incremental successes will form a very big foundation for bigger and greater successes across the NARIs. And that, therefore, once mainstreamed across, it will lead to fantastic adoption of the proven methods and technologies that will spur production at farm level and therefore bring about joy and happiness across our farmers. And lastly, I think in terms of investment for ILCI, maybe for the first time again, you may wish to focus on concentrating your investments into a few institutions so that you don't spread too thin across a number of institutions. And by doing so, you'll be aiming at achieving scale and impact in those institutions where you will have made the investments. And once you achieve that, then they can be used as platforms for lessons and horizontal expansion to other institutions. So the aspect of investment concentration should be at the backbone, should be core in your investment plans as you reach out to the NARIs. So I submit those three areas. If adopted, we think they could take the NARIs to the next level.
Thank you so very much. I appreciate those thoughts. Jessica and Scovia from the NAS. I see Bish nodding, and I'm going to call you up to chime in, but let's hear from the NARIs if you have any thoughts. Jessica, straight on mute. Scovia, you want to go while we wait for Jessica?
I can go on. Yeah, thank you very much. I have a few things to submit in this. First, the Innovation Lab can do different is to support NARIs to build a strategic partnership. That partnership can be NARI to NARI partnership, but also partnership across, like with the Cgir centers and with donor agencies. If partnership is well built, this will encourage resource mobilization, experiential learning, and knowledge sharing. And the second point that can be done differently is to support the NARIs to be able to identify and recognize the problems within themselves so that they can develop and pilot their own tools and methods to address their own challenges, other than developing idea somewhere and just coming and say, okay, now this is the area we want to go about. But if NARIs are allowed to identify what their challenge is, and they can develop tools and methods that really address their challenge, I think this will create a difference. And another one is increasing direct engagement with NARI. That can be through mentoring, like scientists in all aspects of research and even management, but also through direct funding, where the funding comes to the NARIs direct. With these three submissions, I feel, in addition to what Dr. Yona has submitted, I feel it can make a great difference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Scovia. Just to reiterate that the ILCI has a philosophy of the bottoms-up approach. So we're all relying on you to tell us what we can do for you. Who wants to go next?
Okay, I can come in at this point. Basically, I feel like I'm coming always on the third, already only adding to what my colleagues have already added, and they are already pertinent points that are really critical for all of us. I think the NARIs, even in our case, these points are critical even to us. But as an addition, and maybe a point of emphasis is an aspect of institutional capacity building. Most of the NARIs are really struggling. They are using outdated technologies and not having really much on the ground in terms of plant breeding processes. So capacitating the NARIs in terms of infrastructure, cutting edge equipment, and really updated technologies that are like whether ICT and all those kind of things that are modern, which probably might be something that in the West is it's not something new, but in our case, that they might add in quite a tremendous improvement in whatever we do in our NARIs. And lastly, I think in the case of research networks, I think still working in a partnership is something that we would still leverage on, much as we have our own capacity in terms of gender, youth development, or plant breeding. Always having a global, regional, or international perspective to whatever we are doing, it would leverage a lot in terms of the successes that the NARIs would have at the end of the day. So I think with these two submissions, I would also rest my submission here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm going to move on to the next question because I'm in the interest of time. But I would ask Bish to add his thoughts on this question from the previous question, just as we move forward. And this question is going to be is to all the panelists, and I'm going to have Bish go first. And that is, what is the NARI you'd like to see in 5 to 10 years?
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah. So yeah, if I could touch briefly on the previous question as well a little bit, I think I just wanted to go back a bit more to having, centralized services and using that hub model. And I think ILCI is very much promoting that. And that is probably the most sustainable way of supporting a range of national breeding programs in a region. So in terms of, what good looks like in 5 to 10 years, so one of the things we see with a lot of national programs is the pipelines aren't continuous. So funding comes in for a particular project, there's a wave of activity, and then funding drives down, and then the breeding pipelines shrink again. So we're not seeing these continuous pipelines, which is a major problem if you want to keep a continuous flow of products going to market. So we would really like to see that national programs running continuous pipelines, and that of course means that they need continued funding. So one of the things, and maybe related back to your previous question as well, is really advocating to national governments as well as the donor community, but particularly national governments, to support national plant breeding programs. And it's perhaps not as expensive as many of these governments think. It's been pointed out before, many of the costs that are required to run plant breeding programs and research institutes, salaries, infrastructure, electricity, they're already being covered at the moment. So what these plant breeding programs need is that extra bit of operational budget. And I think in most cases, governments would be very happy to support that. It's just they don't have an idea of what it costs to run a plant breeding program. So some of the work we've been doing with some of Yona's team in NARO has been to cost out their breeding programs. And it looks like with budgets of about $100,000, it will be possible to run a meaningful plant breeding program. So if you have a national institute, NARO, for example, with 10 to 15 crop breeding pipelines, a budget of $1.5 million a year should be able to allow those programs to run continuous pipelines 5 to 10 years down the road. And you know, in the wider scheme of things, $1.5 million a year is not a huge amount. It's, you know, a country like Ghana is spending tens of millions of dollars importing rice each year. So I think ILCI partners, everyone, if we can advocate a little bit more for increased and more stable investment in plant breeding from national governments, it would be a big step. So thank you very much, Sarah.
Thank you, Bish. Well, what you'd like to see in NARI in the next 5 to 10 years? Jessica?
Thank you, Sarah. I think I would have 3 submissions of what type of a NARI that I'd like to see in 5 to 10 years. First of all, I would like to see a NARI that is responsive to regional, global, national, and local plant breeding needs. And then related to that would also be a NARI that is responsive to solving context-specific issues in terms of poverty, food security, and nutritional issues, so that the research or plant breeding lines that are producing are not just producing for the sake of research, but are really able to solve context-specific issues that I've mentioned before. And lastly, they should also be able to be an indispensable knowledge and capacity resource for not only maybe academicians, but plant breeders, as well as maybe agro-dealers and any other entrepreneurs that might need such kind of resource in terms of plant breeding. I think those three submissions, I'll be happy to see such NARIs being thriving in that context. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. As we move forward, I anticipate we're running out of time. Please, the audience, if you have questions, can you plug them into the chat box? Thank you. Scovia?
Yeah, thank you very much. The NARI I would like to see in 5 to 10 years, independent NARI that continuously generating new technology that address market needs, and the breeding pipeline is fully functional. And I would also want to see NARI with a strong partnership base, and NARI that is a knowledge hub that can give services to other NARIs, other institutions like university. That is the NARI I desire to see in 5 to 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Scovia. All right. So I would have Dr. Baguma speak about involvement of government in shaping the ideal NARI as a government official, and also to answer that question, what NARI would like to see in the next 5 to 10 years.
Our governments have very clear national economic development frameworks. And in those frameworks, they clearly define the areas how the national research systems should align them to make a contribution to national economic development. And I'll use the case of Uganda. Right now, we have what we call the National Development Plan number 3. And as NARO, we are required to contribute towards the program of agro-industrialization. So the government is demanding that NARO should develop market and industry-oriented products, which should be able to stimulate industries and agro-industrialization. So the governments are at the center of our research agenda. Now, coming to the kind of NARI I'd like to see in the next 10 years, I'll basically submit on 3 things. Number 1, it should be a NARI that is also heavily supported by the national government. We should run away from NARIs that are heavily dependent on donor resources. The governments must take up their own responsibility and ensure that they also come in and heavily support the research agenda for the people of that respective country. And I'm glad that in the case of Uganda today, as we talk, the government of Uganda has come out very clearly and they are supporting agricultural research in this country. Number two, I would like a NARI that goes beyond products and also is able to render research services to the private sector, research services to other government agencies. And by doing so, they expand their horizon and are able to attract in resources and to prove their relevance beyond just only providing research for agricultural research. And lastly, I would go for a NARI that has expanded the capacity for generation of internal revenue. Because as we generate internal revenue, we stop to be dependent on government resources, and then we can emerge as self-reliant. We can only be self-reliant if we are able to generate our own resources and support our own research. I submit.
Thank you so much, Dr. Baguma, for that excellent contribution. Last but not the least, I wonder if there are thoughts from Angela on, as a donor, you know, what is the, you have all of this investment, what is the NARI you'd like to see in 5 to 10 years?
I think it's been said, I'd like to see national programs that are well supported, well networked, and meeting local and regional needs. So I think that my fellow panelists covered this. And Sarah, if I could just take the opportunity to just touch on the previous question. I just want to note that I think it's really encouraging that right out of the gate at ILCI's first annual meeting, you know, the question on the table is how can we improve? I think that bodes well for the success of the program. And I'm reflecting on some of the presentations yesterday. I think Elizabeth and Holly and others who talked about how you're already reflecting and making changes as you go forward. So I think it's really promising. I personally couldn't be happier with the direction this program is headed. So I just wanted to take a quick moment to make that note. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angela. And that's really great to hear from you. All right, we have some comments in the chat box, but I would just like to round up this section by thanking you all for agreeing to be on this panel. It's really appreciated because we know that you are very, very busy, and especially now for your valuable contributions and engagement. That is highly appreciated. Thank you. At this time, we're going to move forward and take a break. However, there's a caveat. During this break, we have a survey, and that is going to be, the link is going to be pasted it's right here in the chat box. We would like you to fill the survey, and we come back at what time are we coming back? At 10:20. So we have 12 minutes of break. So, you know, you can grab a coffee, get out of your seat and all that. Thank you so much, and we'll see you all back soon. Thank you.